Okay, so Van Pierszalowski, I have met a few times at Rare Birds in Southern California, mostly I think more this direction than in his. He hails from the LA area. Van, you're an eBird reviewer for LA County, aren't you?
That's right.
It's one other thing Van does among going birding. So this is not somebody who is only going to be doing this project, but he's a real true-blooded birder. And breeding bird atlas projects are something I'm sure you've all heard of, some more intensely than others. They've been carried out in many states, provinces, a number of foreign countries. But I gotta say, when I heard that they were going to do one for California, I went, well, this is going to be an interesting project for the reasons of it, the size of the state, the remoteness of many areas, despite how many birders there are. But anyway, Van will obviously be talking about this as well as other people working on the project, Sam and others. So without any further ado, take it away, Van.
Thank you very much, Paul. Uh, am I sharing my? No, that's
No,
the wrong one.
no, not yet.
Okay, hold on. Let me try one more time.
Okay.
This one. Oh yeah. Is that showing up?
No, not yet.
Weird. Sam's not sharing anymore, right?
It says that you're sharing your screen, Van, but it's text only. There's no actual display.
Yeah, you have to hit the share a second time on the screen you want to bring up.
Weird. Huh. I'm doing the exact same thing I just did. It's not working. Sam, do you mind sharing? Trying to share?
Yeah.
That's odd. There we go. Slideshow.
Do you want me to do it in just next
Yeah,
slide?
let's just do it. It's not working for me. Yeah, if you want to go
All
slideshow mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it full screen?
Great. Yeah, full
Yeah,
screen.
looking good.
Great. Thank you all. Yeah. Sorry, Sam, you're on the slide duty now. Thank you all for having me. Van Pierszalowski, live in LA here. But yeah, as a Southern California birder, find myself in San Diego often, given the enviable abundance of interesting birds that you get down there. And Sam Saffron is the science director of California Bird Atlas. He will also be sharing later. Morgan Tingley, the chair of the Science Advisory Committee, wasn't able to make it tonight, but he sends his best, and Sam will cover the slides that he was going to talk through. So just a quick overview, go to the next slide of the talk. First, we'll just do an introduction, talk about a little bit about the organization, California Bird Atlas, the timeline, what an eBird Atlas is. We're going to tour the grid. 6 is the question. We'll leave that a little mysterious until we get there. We'll talk about some historical data rescue projects we're doing, and then talk about how to get involved. And then at the end, we'll do questions and answers. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, but we'll be addressing all those questions at the end of the talk. So first slide, that's me. Nice to meet you. And the black neck stilt. I'm born and raised in California, but I spent all my summers in Alaska working on my dad's boat out of Kodiak Island. He was a commercial salmon fisherman, so that's hence the Grundon sea gear there. Spent 4 months of every year of my life until I was 24 on boats up in Alaska. Sadly, before I was a birder, I don't want to talk about that, but still it kind of, shaped who I am, and now have lived in LA for about 14 years, became an eBird reviewer a couple years ago, and now moving on. All right, slide. what is a breeding bird atlas? Just, at a broad overview, it's a system, it's a project, a type of scientific project that was invented in England and in Europe in the 60s. And basically, at a high level, it's a systematic effort to document both the distribution and most importantly, breeding behaviors of every species within a defined region. That could be a country, it could be a state, it could be a county, it could be a wildlife refuge, it could be any sort of defined region over a multi-year time-bound time. So, and usually it's 5 years. So if you go to the next slide, so the basics are, yeah, like I just said, 5 years. Why? It's long enough that it smooths out some outliers. If it was just one year, you might get, an eruption of robins or waxwings or this or that. 5 years is long enough that it smooths some of that out, but it's still short enough to be a legitimate baseline snapshot. So if you look back 100 years ago, and if they had done this 100 years ago over a 5-year period, you'd have a pretty darn good idea of what was going on. And then during that period, which is for us year round, because birds are breeding year round, we'll talk about that later, January 1st, starting 2026 until New Year's Eve 2030 is our Atlas period. And our Science Advisory Committee is working on completion criteria to make sure that there's adequate coverage throughout the entire area. When they invented this, their idea was to repeat the process every 20 to 30 years to track changes over time. In modern atlasing, we don't have to wait that long anymore. There's more advanced statistical modeling, and we can look for changes much quicker. But that's the basic idea. Next slide. So when I was asked to do this about, let's see, a year and a half ago, this all started. Kimball Garrett, who many of you know, up here in Los Angeles, and Lance Binner reached out to me to ask if I'd be interested taking over the second LA County Breeding Bird Atlas. And I said yes before I really even knew what a breeding bird atlas really was. But then I started asking some questions because that's the kind of person I am. And the first question I asked was, I know that there are some states that have done statewide atlases. How many have done them? 44 of 50, including Texas, by the way. If you go to the next slide, it's hard these days to find a map where California is the same color only as Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, Hawaii, not pictured, or the others. 19 states have done more than one statewide breeding bird atlas. 3 have now done 3. A 4th is about to start their 3rd. And go to the next slide. The reason for this is California has done a county atlas approach. And so, understandably so, right? When this idea came to California in the 70s, California's big, diverse geography, how could it possibly be done at once? Seemed very impossible. Now it's 2025, and the idea, as was published in Western Field Ornithologists and some other places, was to eventually do every county. This is what it looks like. Only 15 of the 58 counties have been able to successfully publish a breeding bird atlas. It's less than 17% of the state's land area. I don't know if you'll notice a slight bias towards counties that have a lot of people in them, but makes sense. These are efforts that take a lot of resources, financially, volunteer-wise, and it would be really hard to pull off a breeding bird atlas in Tehama County or Shasta County or Mariposa County or Inyo. And yet, those are some of the areas that are most important from a conservation perspective and from a climate change perspective. From a breeding bird phenology perspective, those are the regions we need to know the most about, and they're the regions that we know the least amount. So slide. But then I asked, okay, that's interesting. Okay, 44 states, not California, if only 15 counties. But maybe why now? So why even do it? Maybe it's an old-fashioned thing. So you go to the next slide. Doesn't eBird, already have enough data? Maybe these breeding bird atlases aren't needed anymore. And so if you go to the next slide, we downloaded all eBird data, Sam actually did, for all years. And we looked at March through August as just like an idea of the peak breeding season to see. And we subdivided the state into atlas block. And if you see red on that map, that means that there have been 0 minutes of effort, any time-bound checklist, any checklist with any amount of time on them, 0 minutes ever, all years, anywhere within the block. And that's a lot of red. We expected some red. Obviously, a lot of that's in the Mojave. There's some clusters in, the Sierra. There's a lot in Northern California. But I was surprised to see that there was 0. I would expect there to be at least one checklist at some point. That's all years. And then on the next slide, you'll see that then we looked at breeding codes, and the map on the left is the one you just saw. The map on the right, red, is the absence of any checklist that has even a single probable or confirmed breeding code anywhere within the block all years, March through August. So if there was one checklist for a 1 minute long checklist and someone had a mourning dove carrying nesting material, it wouldn't be red. And look at all that red. I mean, that is, if that's not an argument to do a statewide breeding bird atlas, then I don't know what to tell you. You can also see these blue areas, and you can see that that's where, and even you can even see Nevada County, which is the one outlier county that has done a breeding bird atlas that's not on the coast. You can see that it's blue. And so these breeding bird atlases have a proven track record of getting people to go outside of their normal areas and breed at a more geospatially kind of full range and document breeding behavior. So when I saw this, I was like, okay, this is good. This is convincing. We'll go to the next slide. And also, birds rely on California, where there's more birds breeding here than any other state. I mean, it feels good to be number one, right? So it's important through that lens. Go to the next slide. And not only is it sheer number, but it's, there's what, 15, is it? In terms of breed species where they breed almost entirely within the state's borders, over 75%. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, obviously we have 2 fully 100% endemic species, island scrubjay and yellow-billed magpie, but Allen's hummingbird is about as close as you can get, tricolored blackbird 98, Nuttall's woodpecker sneaking in at 96% of the breeding population in California, mountain quail, white-headed woodpecker. There's no other state has close to this number. So that's another reason why this is important. And then, so, okay, back in the 70s, I get it. 80s, I get it. 90s, I get it. There's no way California, it's too big. It's too hard. You can never do it. It's not going to work. Well, a couple things have changed since then that make an atlas easier. Number one is eBird. Back in the day, if you wanted to participate in one of these atlases, if you go to the next slide, you would receive a breeding card like this. This is from the unpublished Riverside County Breeding Bird Atlas. We've luckily been able to find and save these invaluable data cards. But you know, imagine walking around in a field, and a lot of you have done this, but a lot of the new birders and new folks, including myself, would find this very much harder than using eBird. And on the back, the next slide, you know, you can see all these species and all these notes. And so now, instead of these pieces of paper and keeping track, you can do it all on your phone. Everybody knows, not everybody, most birders know how to use eBird. There's a, you know, all the county atlases, and the more I read into them, and the more I talked to folks like Don Roberson and you know, and Kimball and Dave Shuford, and the amount of time they spent educating people just on how to fill out these cards, just on that was an extreme amount of work. And now with eBird, we don't really have to do that. We have some education to do around breeding codes for sure, but a lot of it is taken away. And the second reason, if you go to the next slide, is just there's way more birders. Way more birders. Obviously, eBird has grown in popularity, so this isn't to say that you know, this is totally accurate trajectory of birders. There were birders in 2000 who just weren't on eBird, but still, even if you account for that, the exponential growth that really kicked off during COVID hasn't slowed at all. California all years, 7 million checklists, over 100,000 users. That's 800,000 volunteer hours. To the moon and back twice. It's just that, the number of people surveying California. However, the problem is they're covering a lot of the very same narrow areas, and they're not spreading out to most of the state. So that's our primary goal. If we go to the next slide. That was enough for me. I you know, 44 states out of 50, 15 counties out of 58. I talked to 24 state atlas coordinators and learned a lot about how they did their you know, statewide breeding bird atlas. And I learned that one advantage of a statewide breeding bird atlas that is very important is funding. It's a lot easier to get funding for a statewide project than it is for a county-wide project. You do need more funding, but the amount of funding is not 58 times. It's not even 10 times. It's much flatter than that. And so from a funding lens, most state atlases were funded almost entirely by the corresponding state wildlife agencies, which would not be interested in funding county breeding bird atlases for the most part. So with all of that information in mind, and after talking to many other folks in Audubon, California, and the Nature Conservancy and Institute for Bird Populations and other groups, I decided to make a checklist of the 19 steps it required to found a new nonprofit. And I founded a new independent 501c3 nonprofit called California Bird Atlas. On the next slide, you'll see our founding board of directors. Andrea Jones was just announced as the new lead vice president of California for National Audubon. Graham Chisholm founded the Great Basin Bird Observatory specifically to do the Nevada State Breeding Bird Atlas, which had a lot of unique challenges, as you can imagine, given their geography. He's now at the Wildlands Conservancy. And Kevin Hunting, he's retired now, but he was appointed by both Governors Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jerry Brown as the Chief Deputy Director of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, overseeing over 3,000 employees. He retired, fell in love with birds, and as soon as I heard that tidbit, I reached out and was very grateful that he decided to join the board. Then we put together a science advisory committee, which is chaired by Morgan Tingley, a professor at UCLA. I'm also the president-elect of the American Ornithological Society. Ron Melser at California State Parks. Melanie Gogol-Prokrat is at CDFW, one of their incredible leaders in their data department, showing that, you know, we have strong agency support Brian Sullivan, many of you know, one of the co-founders of eBird, still with the Cornell Lab, lives in California. Natalia Ocampo-Penuela, amazing assistant professor at Santa Cruz. Phil Unit, who a lot of you know, maybe he's even on the call, I'm not sure, but also the author of the San Diego County Bird Atlas. Allison Schultz at the Natural History Museum, Sam, who's on the call, and Chris Elphick, who does not live in California. I don't think he's ever maybe lived in California, but he was the PI for both the Nevada State Breeding Bird Atlas and Connecticut's second Breeding Bird Atlas. So we've built an organization from the ground up that's not just me. It's not just me and Sam. It is an incredible group of our board, our science advisory committee, and then on our next slide, our incredible number of partners. And so these are all organizations, nonprofits that have pledged a minimum of $10,000 of support to get the organization off the ground. The timeline, for the project is 9 years. 5 years of that is field work. Starting next year, and then after that there'll be 4 years of data analysis, reporting, application, writing a physical book. And the budget, our estimated budget for the entire 9 years is $6.5 million, and that's based on conversations with other states. And a good chunk of that will go to paying field techs to go to bird in certain areas that are not easy to bird otherwise. It'll pay for postdoctoral researchers, research scientists throughout every year of the project. And one question I asked Ian Davies, who's the manager for the eBird Atlas, is, what makes a eBird Atlas, or what makes a breeding bird atlas successful versus not successful? And he said, you need to have at least one person who's paid full time to run the damn thing. And so part of the funding is that, and that would be me, pending funding and pending board votes and all of that stuff coming in. So that's where we're at. And I'm very happy to announce that we have now raised enough seed funding to pay for the eBird portal, to pay for Sam. And I'm so grateful for all the groups on this. And our door is open for other chapters and other organizations to come on at a $10,000 level. You get to sponsor a species and get involved in the organization at the very beginning. So it's very exciting, and grateful for all these groups, and grateful for your group for having us here today. Okay, moving on. So breeding bird atlas, but we're doing it year round. Why? Well, it's California, and birds are frankly getting it on year round, at least to some degree. Here's a checklist showing Clark's grebes, a nest with young in November. Here's Coco's boobies carrying food in December. We have San Diego. I'm sure many of you have seen this. Here's a nest with 3 young chicks on January 9th off La Jolla. February, here's an incredible photo of a LeConte's thrasher in San Luis Obispo County in February. And so birds are breeding year round. We want to make sure we don't, we want to make sure we cover year round for that reason. And also because on the next slide, there are some interesting things, as the seasons change, coverage change. So this map that's changing colors shows where coverage is during March through August, and then when it gets redder, that's December through February. Some of it makes sense. More people go to the mountains in the summer, vice versa. And so depending on specific partnerships, we will be doing some more specific projects and looking at some specific things in the winter period as well. We won't be doing a winter bird atlas as it's known, in that we won't have separate coverage criteria statewide for a wintering atlas, but we will be looking at specific questions during the winter. Slide. eBird Atlas, what is it? It is an incredible tool. I didn't know it existed. This logo, you're going to hopefully not get sick of looking at because I think it looks pretty nice. But when on January 1st at 12:01 a.m., when you go to ebird.org/Atlas California, you will go to a page. And Sam, I don't know if you can bring up what that looks like. Like it'll be, this looks kind of like normal eBird, except on the top left, it says California. Here's North Carolina's version. And when you click on explore, and then what's a bird that breeds in North Carolina? How about American woodcock? Just off the top of my head. I think that's like the one I choose almost every time. In real time during the Atlas period, this will be auto-populating, and this shows by block and color graded from observed up to confirmed. And as you zoom in, you can get finer grain, and you can look at the specific blocks, and you can see the actual points and the observations. And then you can go in that way. And then also part of the Atlas, on the eBird Atlas, is the effort map. So if you go back to the homepage of the Atlas, you can look right there to the effort map that shows the whole state broken up into Atlas blocks by hours. These are diurnal hours. On the right side here, you see the key. You can toggle it up top. Diurnal, nocturnal, by complete checklist, coded species. And so this is all updated in real time during the Atlas period from January 1st to, or from 2026 to 2030. So this is essentially one of our biggest costs, and one that I'm so happy that we've been able to fundraise for. And with that, I will pass it to Sam to start talking about some of the functionality with eBird. And I hope I did that at the right slide, Sam.
Yeah, very good. The other thing that comes
First,
with,
introduce yourself, I guess.
oh yeah, I can. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Saffron. I'm finishing up my PhD at the University of Minnesota. Before I went back to school, I was an environmental scientist in the Bay Area at an organization called the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And yes, primarily my birding experience was up there, but I had some research projects in San Diego in the Tijuana River Valley, aiding with some of the restoration work happening there. So I spent a lot of time thinking about San Diego County. And along with the functionality on the website that Van just showed, buying into the portal, the project as they're now known on eBird, gets you a lot of mobile functionality as well. When you go to submit a checklist, you choose a project. California Bird Atlas will be on this list. You check it. If you hit remember selections, you don't have to do that again. You start your checklist, and that's, other than that, it's basically normal eBirding. There is some additional functionality to help you do that. This is a mock-up of what it looks like when you're selecting a location and you get the block boundaries and your location and the place you've selected. There's a geofence enabled. So if you're doing a traveling checklist and you're moving close to a boundary, I don't know the exact distance, I think it's 100 feet, you'll get a push notification that says, hey, either back off or start a new checklist before you cross this boundary. So there's a lot of additional functionality built into the app to make this straightforward. Then there's the kind of core, the reason we're doing this is to record these breeding codes for these species. This already is in everybody's standard eBird mobile. You can go in there now and see that if you haven't already. And there will be lots of education on what these codes mean and when to use them and the species-specific kind of quirks and considerations. But in essence, there's 3 levels of breeding codes: confirm, probable, and possible. And you're recording the highest level code on this list that you observe for each species on each checklist. So here's some beautiful photos of Anna's hummingbird with different levels of coding. Because people have been able to enter these breeding code data at any point, you don't need an atlas to do that. There is this wealth of breeding evidence behavioral data that's already in eBird. There's a couple 100,000 records that have been coded with tags already. And while those won't be a part of the kind of web outputs and views that we were showing earlier for the time-defined California Breeding Bird Atlas, which is a 5-year project, we still will be making use of that data. And we've been developing tools to access and visualize it, which is actually something that's kind of hard to do on plain old eBird. I don't have this live pulled up, but if you were to click through this list and click a species, it plots the possible, probable, and confirmed records and gives you links to those checklists. It's kind of a familiar interface, just we had to hack it ourselves to make this data available, and we'll be using it for our analyses. That said, these data don't have a review process. If you have a high count or if you have an unusual species that gets flagged, you have to enter additional information. A reviewer screens it, will reach out to you. There's a level of review that does not exist at all for breeding code data outside of these Atlas projects. So this data will need a lot of vetting before we use it. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Another example of using kind of leveraging eBird functionality data is the integration with the Macaulay library. You can tag photos with codes that correspond to levels of breeding evidence. So there's courtship, display, or copulation tag, nest building. You can tag photos with nests, eggs, carrying food, feeding young. This is all something you can view relatively easily on the Macaulay library, but we've mocked up a little application for people to view this data for California records specifically. If you click on a species in a grid cell, you will get a list of photos of that species with that tag. So there's 30 photos of red-shielded American coot feeding young, and I've sorted them by the number of stars on the photo, and you can look at all of them if you want. But what I want to point out is there's a lot of red here too. And so those are combinations of species and tag that have never had a single photo tagged with that breeding evidence. Some of it makes sense, there are certain species that aren't feeding young, they're precocial young. But some of it is out there, and it can be you who gets the first photo tag. Maybe you already have it in your camera or in your library, but just to tease this a little bit, because I think this sort of thing will be motivating for some people. It's a little bit of a treasure hunt here. Here are species with 0 tagged photos with nest building, nest eggs, or feeding young ever in California. So black-chin sparrows on the list, gray flycatcher, Mabert's towhee, gray vireo, Canada jay, Vesper sparrow. None of these are really, widely distributed and super abundant breeders. And there's reasons why these photos are hard to come by, but it's not impossible. They all have examples in other states. Merganser, black tern, fox sparrow, Hammond's flycatcher, Scott's oriole, Virginia's warbler. There are others, but these are some that caught my eye. So I think that's kind of exciting. And there's scientific value to it too. If we have photos tagged with food, we're getting information on prey and diet being fed to nestlings. And likewise for the materials that nests are being built with. There's a wealth of information there, and we want to motivate people to be documenting their observations. I'm circling back now to the data quality question. Most states have developed these helpful charts that classify each code for each species on a scale of whether it's very likely and a kind of common breeding behavior for that species, or it's just biologically impossible. Great blue herons don't sing. So if someone enters that as a possible code, it needs to be flagged. So we will be doing a lot of data review on our end and providing resources like this to help people to do that education and help people select appropriate codes for their species and the behavior they observed. There is a level of review that is kind of opened up and enabled once you have a project going. And for any of you who are eBird reviewers, this does not fall on you unless you want it to, and you can talk to us. But we project reviewers will have the ability to review and actually adjust breeding code data that is entered into the app. And This,
Without emailing the user.
what's that?
Without emailing the user.
Yeah, we would like to do that because it helps educate people in the process. But
We would, but we do it.
yeah, we have the power. And it's actually very well thought through because you probably did, you did observe a white crowned sparrow singing in LA in April. And in some sense, it makes sense to use that code, but that becomes a behavioral code. We say, okay, that bird was singing, but it's not necessarily indicative of breeding. That's probably a migrant individual. So the breeding code becomes no code observed and the behavior code. Alternatively, you might have just made an error and someone meant to say fledged young and they put F, but that means flyover. So there's a level of review that will be implemented as well. All right, just a quick tour of the blocks here. That's a big number, 16,527. That is the number of blocks in our semifinal block map for the state of California. If you don't know already, blocks are drawn by subdividing USGS topographic quads into 6. They're about 3 by 3 miles each. Here's some from Yosemite Wilderness. And it's going to be a data visualization challenge. It is hard to see individual blocks at the scale of the whole state. There's so many of them. Just to help with a sense of scale, there's about 4,000 football fields per block. They are not tiny. Here's some local flavor to orient you a little bit. Mission Bay, downtown San Diego, you can get a sense for the scale of these blocks. Let's hit all of the corners. The northernmost block is the Soda Mountain southeast. Our southernmost block is in San Diego County. It is Imperial Beach southwest, a little slice near Borderfield. The westernmost block is in Mendocino, Cape Mendocino central east. Sugarloaf Island sticks out further than anything else. The easternmost block is along the Colorado River, on the Arizona border, Gene Wash southeast. We are including offshore islands. We have also tried to capture every islet that we are aware of. I'll post a link to where you can look at these maps yourself. If you find something that we failed to cover, please let us know. No block is too small. We mapped them all. This block is mostly empty, but it has a little sliver of Point Loma. This is Point Loma Southwest. So if you're standing at the lighthouse, you're in Southwest. If you go up to the tide pool trail and are using the bathroom, you have crossed a block boundary. You're now in Center West. Similarly, here's the international border, Imperial Beach Southeast. It's just a tiny little sliver of the block that is in the US, but we haven't mapped to capture any data that comes from there. Knowing the Tijuana River Valley, I think that's a pretty hard place to access. Maybe we can talk to Jeff Crooks at the NER, get us out there, but we didn't want to merge blocks. We kept it very simple. Blocks don't always respect hotspots. So if you are on the McCoy Trail and you follow it south and then do the loop back north by the Navy Field, Ream and along the neighborhood, you've crossed a block boundary. So the hotspot I think is McCoy Trail south, but you'll want to submit multiple checklists there. Tecolote Canyon, similar story. Here's the block boundary right through a popular hotspot. So it will take some behavioral adjustments, but we will all grow to love it, and the mobile app has functionality to help us do that. If you want to explore the maps yourself, please head over to our website in the FAQ section, and there's a little web map where you can view these and toggle on the satellite imagery and find your favorite block and start some planning. All right, the question. We've teased this a little bit. A lot of you are already familiar with the complete checklist question. That's the first question. Is this a complete checklist of the birds you were able to identify? This powers so much of the science that is done with eBird data. And I'm sure a lot of you have a vague sense of why this is important, or maybe you very clearly know why it's important. But just to drive it home a little bit, when I was in the early phases of my graduate degree and living in Minneapolis, I lived right along a park and I'd go out almost every day to Bird Powderhorn Park. And this was my first skunk checklist. I birded for 15 minutes. It was bitterly cold. I said it was below zero for sure, super windy, starting to get dark. I didn't hear or see anything. And that raises a question like why, this is an extreme example, but why is a species not on a checklist? Well, there's a lot of possible reasons. Maybe an observer wasn't really looking in the first place. They were driving, saw a golden eagle go over, and that's all they're recording. They weren't really looking for birds to begin with, so an incidental list. Maybe a bird, you saw a bird and you were just feeling lazy and didn't record it. So that's an incomplete checklist. Or maybe the bird is there, but you just didn't observe it. So that's species present, but imperfect detection. We'll come back to that. Or the last one, and this is what a naive kind of viewer who doesn't really understand birds or birding might think. It's, oh, well, there's no species there. It's because there weren't any birds there. But we all know that's not the case. By answering, is this a complete checklist of the birds you observed, you immediately knock off two of those reasons. It's not because I was being lazy. It's not because I wasn't making an effort. I tried to find birds and I didn't. So it leaves us with, okay, either the species was there and I didn't detect it, or it was truly absent. And birders, formatting's messed up here a little bit, but birders know about imperfect detection. Just because you don't observe a bird doesn't mean it's not there. This is a terrible AI image. This person probably has 19 fingers, and these binoculars are strange, and this is not a real bird. But there's a bird there, and this person's not observing it. It's a fact in biological surveys. Surveys of plants fail to detect plants in an area. You can take DNA samples from the water, and you will not detect something one day, and you'll detect it the next day. And there's a whole field of statistics that is designed to account for this imperfect detection. So going back to my daily walks in Powderhorn Park in Minnesota, this is the zero checklist, but a few days before, I had dark-eyed junco on a checklist, and a few days later, I had dark-eyed junco again. So this tells us something about the probability that you will observe a bird given that it is present. We can assume it was there somewhere on that day as a simplifying assumption, and it lets us account for this imperfect probability. And once you do that, you can look at a place where a bird wasn't observed on any visit and say, well, do we believe that? Like, how much weight do we put into these X's? By accounting for imperfect detection, we can do that. And you add covariates, so you can say, was this a really short checklist? Maybe we shouldn't give it much credit. Was this one at night? Let's not give it much credit. Oh, this was all day. They spent all day. They walked 5 miles and they spent 2 hours and they didn't detect a junco. Maybe there's not a junco there. That's just an example. But this concept can extend to breeding evidence too. So maybe you saw a scrub jay on each of your visits, but you only saw it collecting nest material on one visit. So this gives us a sense of the probability of documenting breeding behavior, given the fact that a bird is in fact breeding at a site. So that was a long-winded way and a quick overview at some of the science and statistics that people working with eBird data use to introduce our new question. This is the complete breeding code question. It really parallels and extends the complete species question. It says, does this checklist include all breeding behavior codes you observed that are higher than H and S? And this seems simple, but we labored over this language. There's a lot of nuance built into this. But basically, again, it's allowing us to model the probability of detecting breeding evidence given that the species is indeed breeding at the site. This opens up a lot of powerful modeling applications that we have to make some kind of sketchy assumptions if we don't ask this of users. Here's an example of the kinds of analyses that opens up. This is a USGS study from the East Bay, and these were formal paid technicians going out and surveying and looking for breeding golden eagles. And they're able to develop these models that, in addition to predicting where on the landscape golden eagles are, that's the various colors in this first map, they add another level to the model and are able to say where on the landscape are golden eagles successfully reproducing. And there are parts of this landscape where there are golden eagles, where there's not golden eagle reproduction. So that is something that as far as we're aware, this kind of model has not been applied to eBird data. And the question we will be asking of users is going to make this a lot easier and more robust. So we're very excited. I think I won't delve into this too much, but we will be providing a lot of educational resources on how to answer this question. The reason we say higher than HNS is because if you're out there in May and there's 20 species singing, we don't want you to have to enter all of those H and S codes to be able to say yes to this, as long as you're entering the codes that are higher level and probable and confirmed breeding behavior. I think you all get the point, so I'm going to leave this for now, but we're happy to take questions on this. Ben, do you want to talk about this section?
Yeah, sure. We can whiz by this. Another, breeding bird atlases are the most powerful tools when they are comparative, when they look at a historic set of atlas data and compare it to something in the future. We all wish there was a statewide atlas 30 years ago that we can compare this to. There was not. However, there is a wealth of data. I'm sure, hopefully, all of you own both of these books, but especially the San Diego County Bird Atlas, incredible publication. We have in California, although there's not a statewide atlas, we have 15 published county atlases. We have agency data. We have iNaturalist data. We have data from eBird. We have data from Christmas bird counts that, even though it's not during the breeding season, can tell us something about year-round birds. We have museum records. We have Grinnell and Miller. We have bird banding lab data that we can gather things through. And so part of our $6.5 million budget over the 9 years is to pay scientists like Sam to basically create species by species models of how things have changed, let's say 30 years ago, at a statewide level to the best of our ability, and that will change. That our percentage of certainty will change depending on which species and where. But so part of this is rescuing some data that has never been digitized. And so if you go to the next slide, there was a monumental effort by the late Barbara Carlson in the late 80s through the mid 90s to do breeding bird atlases in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, two of the largest counties in the United States. The results were never published. I was able to track down a mention of 5 cardboard boxes at a storage shed somewhere in, I believe it was San Bernardino County. I wrote these people, they wrote me back. I drove there. The top picture, we found the shed. That's what we saw when we opened the shed. And the picture on below, those are the 5 boxes of never digitized paper records from these incredibly valuable efforts. And so we are raising money to have these field cards digitized. And using eBird standardized way to input historical data, have them entered into eBird and beyond, and so that they can be used for the public good and also to inform our species modeling. And we've also been able to collect the original field cards for Humboldt County's atlas, and we're talking with a couple other counties as well. So and as previously shown, this is kind of what the field cards look like. So we're really excited about that. And Sam, if you want to speak to this one really quick, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Yeah, we can also assess change against older sources. There's a wealth of kind of even older late 18th and early 19th century, late 1800s, early 1900s data from California. Some of my dissertation work involves trying to use this kind of data to assess change over time, especially in cities. But we want to be encouraging atlasers to visit places that have quality historical data so that we can make those comparisons over time. So this is just one example of a kind of typical report you'd find. This is from 1911, May notes from San Jacinto Lake, Mystic Lake now. And, we want to tell people you should be there in late May, and you can survey this site. And we can see how things have changed. So we've compiled a list of a lot of these kind of highest quality historical surveys that we want to highlight and bring some attention to. And you don't even need to have a last name that is a bird to do it. You don't have to be Willett or Jay.
I think Jay got lucky there.
Yeah.
And with that, how to get involved, we have our website up, californiabirdatlas.org. If you go to the next slide, feel free to join. There's on the top right, that button is at this point our favorite, most impactful button, the donate button. We're a small but mighty organization. Every dollar helps. It's been amazing to see the number of donations that have come in already. I haven't even posted to Cowbirds yet. So it's been awesome to see. And so, you're welcome to sign up there. That's not the only way to get involved, though. Obviously, sign up for our mailing list on that site. And also, we'll be needing everybody's help during this Atlas period.